I guess if you asked me to tell the story of Tom Holland, the real Tom, not just Spider-Man, I'd have to start with something that doesn't always make the headlines, his childhood. Because before the red carpets and blockbuster premieres, before he was flipping across CGI skylines, there was a boy with unruly curls and a pair of Nikes scuffed from dance rehearsals. Born Thomas Stanley Holland on June 1, 1996, in Kingston upon Thames, a leafy suburb just southwest of London, he wasn't exactly destined for superhero stardom. His parents, Dominic, a dry-humored comedian and author, and Nicky, a photographer with a knack for capturing truth in shadows, raised him with 3 younger brothers and a home full of stories, sarcasm, and love. He was never the loudest kid in the room, but he had a kind of energy that didn't need to shout to be noticed. It was in the way he moved, precise, powerful, expressive. His mother saw it early, and by the time he was 9, Tom was enrolled in a hip-hop dance class at Nifty Feet in Wimbledon. It sounds almost cliché to say a dance class changed his life, but it did. That's where Lynn Page spotted him. Lynn, who worked with choreographer Peter Darling on Billy Elliot the musical. Tom didn't know it then, but Lynn had a sixth sense for finding kids with raw talent, and she told his mother, "There's something there." So began the auditions. The kind that chew kids up and spit them out. Only Tom didn't get spit out. He trained for 2 years, ballet, tap, singing, acting, the whole brutal, beautiful package. He got the part of Michael first, Billy's cheeky best friend. But it wasn't long before he stepped into Billy's shoes himself. He wasn't the biggest or strongest kid on stage, but when he danced, it was like the stage belonged to him. The Royal Variety performance in 2008? That was Tom. 13 years old, spinning in midair while Gordon Brown applauded in the front row. He stayed in the role until 2010. Most kids would have burned out. But Tom was different. Even as he dealt with growing pains and schoolyard teasing for taking ballet, he kept showing up. His dad, Dominic, later admitted he worried sometimes that fame would come too early for his son. Turns out he was right to worry, but also right to believe in him. When Billy Elliot ended, Tom didn't fall into obscurity. Quite the opposite. In 2012, at just 16, he landed a role in The Impossible, a harrowing drama about the 2004 tsunami in Thailand. He played Lucas, the oldest son of a family struggling to survive amid the devastation. This was no kid's movie. It was raw, visceral, and demanded more from Tom than anything he'd ever done. He filmed scenes where he had to scream, cry, fight currents of water and emotion, sometimes all in the same take. Naomi Watts, who played his mother, later said he had a maturity that left people stunned. And the critics? They called him a revelation. Hollywood had taken notice. But Tom didn't let it go to his head. He went back to school, Wimbledon College, like a normal teenager. Except, of course, he wasn't exactly normal anymore. He was fielding scripts between science classes, giving interviews after math exams. There's a quiet resilience in that, in the way he handled early fame. He had every excuse to be a diva. But if you ask his friends or old teachers, they'll tell you, Tom stayed grounded. Of course, by now, the Marvel machine was starting to churn in the background. Disney had struck a deal with Sony to bring Spider-Man into the MCU, and the hunt for a fresh face began. Thousands auditioned. Tom sent in a tape. Then he flew to Atlanta to screen test with Robert Downey Jr. There's a story that during the final callback, Tom was doing flips in the hallway to burn off nerves. The execs saw it, and something clicked. Here was a kid who was Peter Parker, awkward but agile, smart but humble, vulnerable but brave. When he got the call, when he officially became Spider-Man, he was in his childhood bedroom. He screamed. Then he flipped onto his bed, as if his body already knew what it would soon be doing on screen. It was 2015. He was 19. But Spider-Man? That came later. For now, he was just Tom, still figuring things out, still dancing in his head, still that kid from Kingston who had no idea his whole life was about to change. When Tom first suited up as Spider-Man, he didn't just put on the costume, he stepped into a legacy. And that was no small thing. 2 actors had already worn the red and blue before him. Fans were protective, skeptical. But when he swung onto the screen in Captain America, Civil War 2016, stealing scenes from veterans like Chris Evans and Robert Downey Jr., the crowd went quiet. Then they cheered. He brought something the others hadn't, a kind of boyish sincerity that felt like Peter Parker had finally leapt off the page. Behind the scenes, though, Tom was just trying to keep up. Marvel was a massive machine, and suddenly, he was right at the center. His first solo movie, Spider-Man: Homecoming, 2017, was a test. Could he carry a franchise? Could a 19-year-old from London make audiences believe he belonged in the same universe as Iron Man? The answer, of course, was yes. But that didn't mean it was easy. Tom was obsessed with getting it right. He trained endlessly, doing as many stunts as Marvel would allow. He studied American high school life to nail the accent and the energy. And he worked closely with John Watts, the director, to ensure that Peter Parker wasn't just a mask, but a person. A teenager who worried about tests and girls, and whether he was good enough. The movie crushed at the box office. Critics praised Tom's performance. Fans embraced him. And yet, behind the curtain, Tom was still adjusting to the weight of fame. He once said in an interview that the moment he realized everything had changed was when he couldn't go out to get coffee without someone yelling, "Hey, Spidey." It seemed small, but it was constant. The attention, the pressure, the expectation. It didn't help that he was also figuring out who he was outside of Spider-Man. Fame has a way of speeding up some parts of your life and freezing others. He was traveling constantly, working nonstop, saying yes to everything because he was terrified the offers might dry up. And yet, he kept pushing himself. In Avengers: Infinity War, 2018, he delivered a moment that crushed audiences everywhere. Peter's "I don't feel so good" line, improvised in the moment, became one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the MCU. He brought humanity to a CGI apocalypse. The next year, Endgame sealed his place in cinematic history. Not bad for a kid who used to wear hand-me-down tap shoes. But something deeper was starting to shift. With Spider-Man: Far From Home, 2019, Tom was no longer just the new kid. He was the face of the next phase of Marvel. He was in press tours across continents, dodging spoilers, answering the same questions again and again. At some point, it got to him. You could hear it in interviews, his voice just a little more tired, his answers a little more careful. Then came 2020. The world stopped. The pandemic grounded Hollywood. And for the first time in years, Tom got to breathe. He returned to his family's house, spent time with his brothers, played golf, and let himself be still. That break, he later said, saved him. It reminded him of what he loved. Not just performing, but storytelling. Not just acting, but feeling something real on screen. When filming resumed, he was different, grounded, more selective. He took on Cherry, 2021, a gritty drama where he played a traumatized war veteran turned bank robber. The film wasn't a massive hit, but Tom's performance was raw, risky, and miles away from the boy in the spandex suit. It was him saying, "I'm more than Spider-Man." Still, it was No Way Home, 2021, that changed everything. Bringing together 3 generations of Spider-Man, Tom, Andrew Garfield, and Tobey Maguire, it became a cultural event. The film broke records. Audiences cried. And Tom, at the center of it all, delivered a performance that was equal parts action and heartbreak. Peter loses Aunt May, his identity, his friends. By the end, he's completely alone, and finally, truly Spider-Man. That film was a turning point, professionally and personally. Off-screen, Tom was growing closer to Zendaya, his co-star. The media loved them, but they kept things quiet. Private. That was important to him. Fame had taken a lot, but he wasn't going to let it take his heart. Around this time, Tom also started speaking more openly about mental health. He admitted that the industry could be brutal, that the pressure could be suffocating, that sometimes he needed to step back. In 2022, he deleted social media from his phone, saying it was overstimulating and detrimental to my mental state. That vulnerability, that honesty, it made people admire him even more. Because Tom wasn't pretending. He wasn't a manufactured PR product. He was just a guy trying to stay sane in a world that demanded perfection. And somehow, in the middle of all that, he kept delivering performance after performance, making audiences feel something deeper than just spectacle. He was no longer the kid from Kingston. He was a man now, scarred, wise, still charming, still humble, but changed. And the world was watching to see what he'd do next. It was 2022, and Tom Holland stood on the edge of something unfamiliar. Not a building, not a stunt, but the edge of burnout. The kind you don't see coming until it's breathing down your neck. His face was everywhere, on posters, billboards, late-night shows, and it started to feel like everyone owned a piece of him. He needed to reclaim something. Maybe everything. That's when he made the hardest call of his career. He said no. To press tours. To sequels. It wasn't dramatic. There were no headlines screaming, "Tom quits." Just a quiet fade into privacy. He retreated from the spotlight, moved back to London full-time, and started focusing on things that didn't require a camera or applause. Golf. Family. Cooking. Therapy. A normal life, or at least the closest thing someone like him could find. But even in rest, Tom was rebuilding. In silence, he was choosing again. In 2023, when he did return, it was with a series that no one saw coming, The Crowded Room. He wasn't just acting, he was producing. The show, based on the true story of Billy Milligan, a man with dissociative identity disorder, required everything from Tom. Emotionally, mentally, spiritually. He called it the hardest thing he'd ever done. After one scene, he broke down on set and had to walk away. It was that real. And when the camera stopped, he didn't bounce back immediately. He took a break from acting altogether. For over a year, there was no new Tom Holland movie. No interviews. No Spider-Man 4 announcements. Just a guy figuring out who he was when no one was watching. During that time, his relationship with Zendaya deepened. They traveled in secret, small cities, quiet beaches, late-night drives through the English countryside. No red carpets. No filtered selfies. Just time. Tom often said she grounded him. That she reminded him who he was before the chaos. And maybe that's what made their connection different. It wasn't born of Hollywood. It survived in spite of it. When he finally came back, it wasn't to save the world. It was to sing. Literally. Tom took on the role of Fred Astaire in a biopic that had been in development for years. He trained for months, tap, ballroom, voice lessons. This wasn't Spider-Man. It was silk suits and soft shoes, swing music, and old Hollywood magic. But he loved it. It reminded him of where he started, Billy Elliot, dance studios, sweating under cheap stage lights. The film, released in late 2024, surprised critics. Not because Tom was good, everyone knew that, but because he disappeared into the role. His Fred wasn't a caricature. It was restrained, graceful, haunted. Awards buzz followed. Suddenly, the industry wasn't just calling him the MCU's heartthrob. They were using words like serious actor, chameleon, craftsman. And through it all, he stayed quiet, grateful, focused. He turned down the noise, and it worked. People were still talking, but this time, he didn't feel like he had to answer back. By early 2025, whispers of Spider-Man 4 resurfaced. But Tom didn't rush. He met with Kevin Feige, the Marvel boss, and said he'd only return if there was a story worth telling. He didn't want to play Peter just because he could. He wanted Peter to mean something again. That's Tom, though. Always choosing the long road. The hard road. The real one. You'd think that after all the awards talk, the austere biopic, and the years of proving himself, Tom would feel complete. But if there's one thing he's learned about fame, it's that it doesn't fill you. It just makes you more visible. And sometimes, more alone. In 2025, with his face once again on the rise, not as a boyish hero, but as a mature, calculated actor, Tom started to ask the question he'd been dodging for a decade. Who am I when I'm not performing? Because the world had known him as Peter Parker, Billy Elliot, Lucas, Nathan Drake, Fred Astaire. But those weren't him. They were pieces he borrowed, skins he shed. The real Tom? He was still looking. He talked about it in therapy. Openly. Something actors rarely do without the lens of PR. He admitted that performing had always been a kind of escape for him, a way to disappear into other people's problems so he wouldn't have to face his own. But now that he was older, quieter, less afraid of being seen, he was trying to face himself. That's when he surprised everyone again. Not with a blockbuster, but with a short film. It was his directorial debut. Just 15 minutes. Shot in a small coastal village in Cornwall. No superheroes. No explosions. Just a father and son, a broken boat, and a conversation that never quite happened. He wrote it himself, shot it on a tight budget, and cast 2 local actors instead of anyone famous. The title? Driftwood. It premiered at a small festival and didn't make headlines. But it made something better. It made truth. One critic called it a quiet miracle. Another said, you can feel Holland's soul in every frame. That hit different. Because for Tom, Driftwood was the first time he'd told his story, even if it was disguised in other characters. It was about loss. About trying to fix something that maybe was never meant to be fixed. About grief that passes through generations like a storm. He didn't cry at the premiere. But Zendaya did. By now, they were living together. Not in some glass penthouse in New York, but in a home just outside Richmond, close to where Tom grew up. She'd bought it with him. It had ivy on the walls, creaky floors, and a kitchen big enough for his Sunday roasts. They adopted a dog. Named him Murphy. He barked at squirrels and slept on Tom's side of the bed. The tabloids kept guessing about marriage, kids, all of it. But Tom smiled through it. Because this part of his life, he wasn't going to sell it. Privately, he was writing more. Journals. Scene ideas. Dialogues on napkins. And he started producing quietly, helping other young actors get their shot. He remembered how hard it was when he started. How close he came to being overlooked. Now, he wanted to hold the door open for someone else. That's when he got the call from Nolan. Christopher Nolan. The script was called The Odyssey. A modern reimagining of Homer's epic, full of metaphor, grief, love, and longing. Zendaya was already cast as Penelope. Nolan wanted Tom for Odysseus, not the warrior, the man, lost at sea, drifting between worlds. It was the hardest script he'd ever read. And he said yes. Because for the first time, Tom wasn't trying to escape something with acting. He was trying to understand it. He flew to Iceland for 3 months. No Wi-Fi, no press. Just him, Nolan, Zendaya, and a handful of the best crew in the business. There were days he cried on set, not because the scene required it, but because he finally let himself feel everything he'd been pushing down since his first audition. The movie wouldn't come out until late 2025, but already, insiders were calling it a masterpiece. Tom didn't care. What mattered was that it felt honest. Like a letter to the world that had watched him grow up. And maybe, a letter to himself. When The Odyssey premiered in Venice in the fall of 2025, it wasn't the fireworks or standing ovations that got to Tom. It was the silence in the final scene. The stillness of an audience holding its collective breath, not because of a twist or a reveal, but because they felt seen. Because this time, the pain on screen wasn't mythical. It was human. The movie hit differently. And not just because of Nolan's direction, or Zendaya's devastating calm, or Tom's heartbreaking restraint. It hit because it was the story of a man coming home. Tom didn't need to say much during the press tour. He let the film speak. When a reporter asked him what Odysseus taught him, he paused, then said quietly that sometimes the hardest journey is not going out into the world, but coming back to yourself. That line trended. But for him, it wasn't a quote. It was a truth he'd earned. He returned to London after the whirlwind, and life felt soft. In the best way. He and Zendaya kept things simple. Sunday mornings at the flower market. Golf with his brothers. Dinner with his parents, who still treated him like their clumsy oldest kid, not an international star. There were rumors, of course. Oscar nominations. A secret screenplay. A possible return to Marvel. But Tom didn't rush. He'd learned patience. Learned that sometimes, the most important thing you can do is wait for the right story. He still danced when no one was watching. Still stayed behind after theater shows to meet young performers. Still answered fan letters by hand when he had time. Because he remembered what it felt like to be small and dreaming and desperate for someone to see you. In December, he and Zendaya released a joint statement. Not on Instagram, not through publicists, but quietly, through a handwritten letter posted in a local London bookstore window. "We're getting married," it read. "And we're not inviting the world. Just the people who knew us before it all." The photo next to the note wasn't a diamond or a designer dress. It was Murphy, their dog, wearing a bow tie. Tom's life wasn't perfect. He still had bad days. Still struggled with anxiety. Still wrestled with whether he was doing enough, being enough, feeling enough. But now, he faced it with open hands. With less fear. With more love. He was no longer hiding behind characters. He was choosing them. Not to become someone else, but to express who he finally was. Years from now, when people talk about Tom Holland, they'll talk about Spider-Man. Of course they will. The flips, the quips, the heartache. But if you look closer, really look, you'll see something more. You'll see a boy who turned pressure into purpose. A dancer who found rhythm in silence. An actor who chose truth over fame. And a man who, against all odds, came home to himself.